Does your family ever get exasperated with you for stockpiling such things as paper towels, bottled water, or toilet tissue? Well, they certainly can't object to you stockpiling money. Silver, the only money recognized by the U.S. Constitution, and your first 10-ounce bar of pure silver can be had at spot price with no premium by going to sdbullion.com/rp. And when you buy it that way, you'll be supporting Reluctant Preppers as well by going to sdbullion.com/rp. Thanks.
This is a quick update to thank you for building our number of patrons to 70 and growing on patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.
Soon, when we reach 100 active patrons, we're going to start sending out a 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle each and every month to one active subscriber, so you don't want to miss out on that.
Please help us grow by subscribing today at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a returning guest today. Bill Murphy is a co-founder of GATA.org, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. He also runs a website, Le Metropole Cafe, that talks about financial matters. He's here with us again on Reluctant Preppers to bring us up to date on developments and philosophies surrounding what it means to be a sound money advocate in the time when the world has gone mad. Bill, thanks for joining us here again on Reluctant Preppers.
Great to be back, Dunnigan. Thank you.
It was great meeting you in person at the first ever Liberty Mind Mastermind Symposium at Dallas, Texas, which I understand is your hometown.
Yes, it is.
And we enjoyed some great barbecue there at Sonny's Pit Barbecue, and had a great time hearing you speak at the conference. And we have some questions later on here today that have been submitted by viewers, but I wanted to hit you up on a few topics of, I think, common interest before we get there, if we could. The first one is about something you and I were talking about as this scenario grinds on and we keep seeing this suppression of gold and silver and other precious metals in the face of a melt-up of the bubble markets, the bubble of everything, as Jerry Robinson likes to call it. Can you tell us about a different perspective of looking at that from a risk-reward ratio and why that may be increasing the security and safety of considering investing some of your hedging your bets in precious metals?
Well, it's one way for people to hang in there, understand what's going on, because as you mentioned, I mean, these past years have really been tough to deal with because other assets, whether it's real estate, art, you had the crypto going nuts, stock market's been going up for 10 years now, and gold and silver have basically been nowhere since 2011, gone down, and it's been incredibly frustrating and tiresome. At the same time, because of what's going on, and you've had this bubbleization, as you might call it, of various markets, they're way up here, and gold and silver are way down here. And the dichotomy between the two is growing and growing, and it's liable to lead to an explosion in the gold and silver markets when people don't expect it. And if this could happen after other assets have been slaughtered, and people have been calling for corrections in the market for some time, but at some time that's going to occur. And the best protection people can have once, if there's a liquidity crisis, for example, will be to be in gold and silver and the shares. And I think we have moves coming that people aren't going to believe when this occurs.
One way that people can look at what you just described is looking at the gold to Dow ratio or the silver to Dow ratio, and they'll see that we are just so out of historical range. We are just so skewed right now that for people to do what we're being encouraged to do, and that's plow more and more and more money into the stock market through 401ks or whatever, is really is basically preparing to buy high and hope to sell higher. But in the face of that, there are these undervalued asset classes. Could you talk about the undervalued assets story briefly? Why gold and silver and other precious metals are and should be looked at as an undervalued asset right now?
Well, from my standpoint, and of course, I'm chairman of the Gold Antitrust Action Committee with my colleague Chris Powell, Secretary Treasurer, is that we've focused on the gold cartel almost for the last 20 years and what they've done, what they haven't done, and they've gone into absolute lockdown mode since 2011 and especially the last year or two down at these price levels. I have a laugh with my followers about silver trading at on both sides of a net like a tennis match at 1650, above 1650, below 1650. And it's gone on all year long. Silver breaks down towards 16, it comes back up. Silver gets above 1675 or 80, it goes back down. And they've created an artificially low price situation for both gold and silver. So it makes them incredibly undervalued. And it's because of these gold cartel forces, which is the bullion banks and the U.S. government and some other foreign banks, that have gone, out of their way to enforce the lockdown of these precious metals prices. And they're going to reach a point when they won't be able to do it anymore. The physical market's going to tighten up, and they're just going to have to retreat dramatically.
You've talked to us about that several times in the past, about the actual mechanisms that you see when you guys pay very close attention to this. You see the actual techniques that get used over and over, these plays from their playbook. But you've been talking about the thing that breaks that whole game open is when the physical demand outstrips the ability to stand for delivery on the paper game that's being happened. What do you think will be some of the triggers that will initiate that shift in physical demand outpacing the ability to supply it? Well,
silver is the weirdest market I've ever seen. I've been around commodities for 45 years, and it's just bizarre. And for an easy example to understand is normally when a market gets very cheap near the cost of production, above or below it, interest goes away. People don't hedge anymore. There's no speculators. There's no interest. And the silver open interest right now is 90,000 contracts, 85,000 contracts higher than it was in 2011 when it went from 16 to 50. And they keep selling and selling and selling it to keep it under control. Now, to answer your question, silver is used in many different industries and a very valuable product. At some point, I think they're running down the silver situation right now, the physical market, which is why they're selling all these paper contracts on the COMEX. At some point, there's going to be some kind of trigger where somebody's just going to say, look, I need X amount of silver. I don't care what the price is. And I've been saying this, since the last time we were interviewed and before then. If silver ever gets above 21, and it's around 16.25 right now, it will go absolutely berserk, and it'll just start feeding on itself, and there'll be a panic. So my guess is something will occur in the real markets in which there'll be a demand for silver, and it can't be met because the bad guys, as I call them, in silver, it's a J.P. Morgan gang, they're going to run out of physical supply, and that's when all heck breaks loose.
We had another question before we get into our viewers' questions, and that is, a lot of this, what you're describing, has been something you've not only researched for years, but also written about. You've prosecuted. You've brought court cases about this, and they've been heard, and in some cases settled in your favor. But why is it we don't read about this in the mainstream press? What's going on that you've mentioned in the past about freedom of the press? But what is the current state of affairs about freedom of the press regarding the truth of what's going on with precious metals prices?
Well, one of my pet peeves, we grew up, against the Russians and the Chinese, most importantly against the communists, because they had no free press and no free market.
That's right.
It's like, are you kidding me? No matter what happens, we're not allowed, God is not allowed to be mentioned in the mainstream press. I was on CNBC almost 20 years ago and never allowed back. And it's because this is all about the rich and powerful. And whether it's the people in the industry or the press, nobody wants to go against the rich and powerful, and they're the ones behind the rigging of the markets. If gold goes up, going up $100 tomorrow, everyone would say, what's wrong? What's wrong? It's bad. Paul Volcker said that, former Fed chairman. Gold up is bad. Gold down is good. So they want to keep the gold price suppressed, and to give more credence to that, because that is the key, they've gone after silver also because they don't want to have a big difference between gold and silver. Now the silver situation is completely out of hand, but so they've knocked them both down. And it's staggering to know that we supposed to live in a free country, free press, and we don't. It's one of the things that I've learned doing this all these past many years, and it's quite scary.
As people watch the main markets like the Dow or the NASDAQ pressing higher and higher over the last decade, it's difficult to stay patient when you're sitting there trying to hedge your bets with precious metals and you're seeing them go down or sideways. What are some philosophies that you want to remind people about as far as bearing through that tedium and that stress of a suppressed market that grinds on over a period of long time?
Well, again, if you look at the gold and silver prices, what they've done these past many years versus other asset prices, it's astounding the difference. And it's like a rubber band that's going like this. And at some point, it's all going to revert. I mean, silver is incredibly cheap, compared to gold. Gold is very cheap compared to financial assets. And if you look at what the debt is and the budgets and what's been going on and how other markets have been jacked up, at some point we'll revert to the mean. And it's the way things go. This is taking a lot longer than my colleagues and I thought it would before things changed dramatically. And just recently, with gold around 1,300, the gold cartels, I call it, they went to an all-out attack. We've been going down now for nearly a week and a half. When they did it on a day when gold was taken down, when there was nothing going on, the dollar was lower, nothing was going on in the markets. It was a Friday, they just buried it. Silver had finally broken out. They took it down 75 cents, from around 17.
That's right.
And there was no explanation for it. And that, for me, was intended for them to go all out, maybe perhaps to get the specs more short so they could cover, to make it as bearish as possible. There are some people talking about resets. I mean, to me, that's hard to imagine. But if they're ever going to have a reset, they're going to want to get their colleagues and the gold cartel and these banks as much out of the short position as possible before it ever occurs.
If we could turn our attention to some viewer questions, we've had several that were submitted by our viewers for you specifically. This one from Victory CSA, pardon me. In your opinion, is there any hope that Dr. Judy Shelton, economic advisor to President Trump, will have any influence on Trump returning to the U.S. dollar to sound money backed by gold and silver if Trump is still in office when the mathematically assured monetary reset occurs?
Well, we heard a lot about Dr. Shelton, Judy Shelton, when Trump first got elected, and her name was mentioned all the time, and she sort of disappeared. And from our standpoint, of course, Trump has been no different than any of the other people in office. And from our standpoint, he doesn't even run the show. That's what Bill Clinton said, at least this particular show anyway. Clinton said, I didn't realize I wouldn't be running the show when I became president. And it's the money and power behind the scenes that's doing this. And until I think the physical market turns on them, we have a problem.
I remember, I think it was two quotes from Trump. One was saying, I like gold early in his campaign and presidency. The other was, I like a strong dollar. And then later on that changes. Oh, actually, no, we have to. It looks like defending a strong dollar is not necessarily he doesn't no longer believe that that's in our best interest, according to the more recent statements.
Well, as far as in the beginning, it was my opinion that President Trump wanted a weak dollar for jobs reasons. Now we have all this trade talk and the market dollars going up and down. But, for him to create the job picture that he wanted and is doing, a cheap dollar would be better than a stronger dollar.
We have another question from Sergio Pereira, who says, is Bullion Vault trustworthy? And maybe we can broaden that to vault storage in general, and as specifically, is there any reason that people should have reason to believe any particular vaulting or custodian company is more trustworthy than another, or any jurisdiction more trustworthy than another for storage of their precious metals?
Well, it's a good point, but I've never heard anything negative about Bullion Vault. And yes, people have to be careful about putting their money any place, and need to check it out as best they can. And certain firms better reputations than others, and you never know. Look at Morgan Stanley was charging people for holding their silver years ago, and they got fined on something like $2, $3, $4 million, but they were charging everybody interest, and the silver wasn't there.
That's right.
The same silver for the So you never know what's really going on. So you got to be very careful.
Another user, another one of our subscribers, Alpine Maximus, writes, and this is a very short question: when should I sell?
Well, a lot of us wish we'd sold in 2011, but I think this move is going to be extraordinary. For me, I think when silver gets over 100, I'll start looking into selling. And in my opinion, back in 2005, when GATA had its conference up in the Yukon, that gold would eventually, when gold was something like 400, then gold would trade at between $3,000 and $5,000 an ounce. So I think when you get up to numbers and everybody wants to be in gold and silver, and then it's time to begin lightening up.
That reminds me of how much you could see everywhere. There were kiosks in every mall. There were banners hanging in shop fronts all around saying, we buy gold, or sell your gold here, that kind of thing. So you're right, there's signs of the time to watch for that tells you when sentiment is at a peak in the populace in general. This question, it's almost a trick question. This is from Christian Rivera saying, what would be the impact of Russia, quote, dumping about half of their treasuries holding of their dollar holdings in the short term? We just spoke with Rob Kirby in the past week, who talked about the fact that it was revealed recently that 2 months ago Russia in fact did sell about half of their U.S. Treasury holdings, and it didn't seem to cause a significant perturbation in the debt markets. Do you believe that further significant selling of U.S. debt by either Russia or China or any other major holders would have a greater than the minimal impact that we saw when Russia sold approximately half their holdings 2 months back?
Well, right, it didn't have much difference, and there was all this talk about China and U.S. and trade, and U.S. Treasuries and China buying gold, and whether they want the gold price down, and they're helping it to keep it down because they want to buy more gold. That's I'm clueless about that one, and it's hard to know. But if things get really nasty, and if China ever wants to pull the trigger and change things dramatically in terms of world financial affairs, they could just say they're going to buy up all the gold anybody wants to sell, and they could sell some treasuries to do that. So it's a possibility that it's talked about in our camp. I certainly would love to see it, but it's for the time being, it's just talk.
And just circling back, Bill, to your organization, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee at GATA.org, what kind of research are you guys currently involved in, and what kind of, as watchdogs, what are you watching these days, and what should people be aware of that most people are not going to be aware of?
Well, we've been there. I mean, I've been to the House committees, to the judiciary people. We've been down to see Ron Paul, the Speaker of the House. We've had letter campaigns, emails. As you mentioned, we've had legal situations with the Fed. We've tried to get all sorts of information. We did get some. We've been out there, fighting the good fight, as they say, and we're going to stay at it. Right now, we're looking at maybe trying to get a campaign going with one of the committees, and we're working on that behind the scenes. We'll see how that goes and see if we can get people, taking a new interest in the gold market and what's really going on. As probably mentioned many times, as far as we know, there hasn't been an audit since 1953 or 55, an independent audit. So the whole thing is mysterious. It's the most, my colleague says, the United States would rather divulge its nuclear secrets than what's going on in the gold market. It's that big a deal. It's that important, and our job is to fight for free markets and have the real story told.
Yeah, related to that is the desire on the part. You mentioned meeting with Congress and so on, and Ron Paul. We had the opportunity to join the Ron Paul Institute's Peace and Prosperity Conference in Washington, D.C. There was discussion from him in the past about the role of precious metals as money in the U.S. Excuse me. Just this spring, March 22nd of 2018, there was House Resolution 5404 introduced about defining the U.S. dollar as a measure of gold. You've mentioned in the past that that you don't see, other than a few congressmen being willing to stand up for this. What do you see about the future of bills like this?
Once again, I go back to my main theme. This is about the rich and powerful, and they don't want to hear it. So I don't think things like this are ever going to go anywhere. We certainly 20 years ago, and we've been there. We've talked to them, and maybe one day that will all change. Especially, and I think when it could possibly all change is when there's a financial crisis, and the gold cartel loses control of the gold and silver markets, and everybody's saying what's happening, what's going on. And that's when I think the scandal will be revealed, because they'll go back, then they will get into some of these issues and these details, and they'll find out, oh my gosh, how could this have happened? But we've been there before, whether it was Madoff or Enron, and they didn't go anywhere for a while either. Look what happened.
Yeah, some people say it'll be just the opposite. Is when the things blow up is when the trap gets snapped shut, because the medicine will be worse than, the cure will be worse than the disease, as far as the final solution of a one world currency or full cashless society under government control or something like that. Although we keep hoping as reluctant preppers, and I know you're a sound money enthusiast, that people who have prepared by making sure that they've hedged with physical precious metals are going to be prepared at least to have some options that people that don't have that will lack. Bill, if people want to find out more about your work at gata.org or La Metropole Cafe, where can they find out those details, and what kind of resources will you make available to them?
Well, I talk about the gold and silver markets every day, and we have other people's commentary that goes up there, and I cover the precious metals and some in the financial market area. They can go to the Metropole Cafe, sign up for a 2-week free trial, and see if it's worth it to them. My colleague Chris Powell at www.gata.org has a not a newsletter, but he sends out stuff all the time during the day, and what he thinks is important and pertinent to Gata, and he's done a great job all these years, and we're going to hang in there till we beat these guys.
Well, Bill Murphy, co-founder of gata.org. By the way, folks, we're speaking with Bill on Tuesday, June 26, 2018. Bill Murphy, thank you so much for joining us here again on Reluctant Preppers.
Dunnigan, you're a good man. Thank you.